Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this week for another episode of Recovery in 20. This week, I'm joined by Patrick Kelly. He works at AspenRidge Recovery. You got promoted recently. Your title is
Director of Operations.
Director of Operations, and he's a former client. So I want to talk to Patrick about what his story is. How did he end up coming from self-admitted drunk restaurant person to kind of running things over here at Aspen Ridge. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. I have a much similar story to most everybody you hear in recovery. That and I say normal now because normal is it looks a lot like divorced families, trauma, that kind of stuff, and so my story isn't special, but. I noticed as I was growing up, and a lot of people will say this in recovery, that they just felt like they didn't fit in. And so everything just seemed kind of like I had to try really hard at everything with friends and sports and all that kind of stuff. And, I remember taking the first time I got drunk I was 12. And I had stayed overnight at a friend's house, and he had an older brother, and they had friends, and so they had brought over. And if anybody knows what this is, it was a pickle jar, but it had black velvet and vodka in it. So it was just this nasty.
That sounds pretty rough.
Nasty poison, and we were mixing it with grape juice and little Dixie cups. I still can't use Dixie cups to this day, but I remember at one point through the course of the night that. I remember looking in the mirror and saying, this is how I want to feel forever. I mean, I just vividly remember that just coming to mind, and so I chased it, early on and throughout my teens, and I definitely had a problem around 15, 16 years old, and I'd mixed it with some drugs and things like that, but it really wasn't my thing. Booze was I felt like I could control it, at least how much went in my body, but
it's so much more socially acceptable than even pot back then or anything like that. Everyone drinks.
Yeah, and kids, we used to have a friend that his mom would say, okay, you guys can, I'll buy you wine coolers or whatever. Yeah, that's totally dating me. But you can't leave the house. And so we would do that, and then we would leave the house. But yeah, it just seemed like the more I drank, the group that I was hanging out with, there was it just kind of escalated to where consequences started coming into play. And I didn't like that. And I kind of wanted to do what I wanted to do, and like us addicts do. So I rebelled a lot, and I drank a lot, and I got into more and more trouble, and it was just something that I knew in my head that it had become a problem, but I didn't know what to do about it, nor did I really want to do anything about it. I just thought, manage better, control, like plan out your evening or plan out your drink. Yeah, none of that stuff worked. So I got my first trip to rehab I was 25, and I was drinking and doing things like waking up in strange houses. I had 2 kids, and I was married, and I just would disappear. And
was it your choice to go that first time, or was it sort of maybe a family ultimatum?
It was my choice, but I did it to kind of get out of some trouble. I was a manager of a restaurant, and I had let a group of employees back in after close, and we proceeded to drink and just trash the place. And so, my boss obviously found out about it, and so I went to rehab. But I just knew I wanted it to stop, and I didn't know how. And honestly, rehab back then was like, maybe they'll teach me how to get rid of my problems so I can drink like a normal person, like I saw everybody having a good time. And so that was my first experience with it, and it was a 30-day rehab back then, and a lot of it's just informational. So they teach you about what addiction is and different facets, but there's really no kind of therapy involved. There's no kind of one-on-one stuff like that. So I had gotten out of there. I got involved with AA. My crowd was AA, and I stayed sober for 11 years. But in the 10th year, I had some medical stuff come up. I had a brain tumor, and boy, that was an excuse to drink, right? So what happened was I went through that, and then I started getting all the pharmaceutical drugs, all the narcotics. And
did you find when you picked up again that it was back to as bad as you were right away, or was there?
It was different because it was always just drinking, and now it's prescribed drugs for pain and for things like that. So I didn't put two and two together at first, and then I noticed I was starting to get a little addicted to some of the stuff, and had gone through detox and got rid of all of it. But about a year after that, so here's how I think. I was driving home one day from work, and I remember thinking maybe that brain tumor was causing my alcoholism, and maybe now that it's gone, I can drink. And
the length we will go to.
Yeah, and it's a real thought. Yeah,
and you believe it 100% too.
Yeah. And everybody else goes, "What? Are you nuts?" So I did that, and I think the story goes, it was the first day it was like 3 beers, and the next day was a 6-pack, and the next day was a bottle of Stoli, and the next day was a divorce, and it just, that's when I knew that I had picked up, and 10 times worse than when I had left off before. And I just couldn't control it. And I think at that point I was just resigned to, this is how I'm going to live, this is how I'm going to die. On and on and on. And so I never really heard about therapy or treatment in AA meetings. I heard, get it together, get a big book, come to meetings, you'll be fine. Get
a sponsor.
Yeah, get a sponsor.
Work the steps.
Yeah, and I did that, but there was always this kind of reoccurring current of, there's something else there, and I don't know what it is, but I'm not okay with just not drinking, and I'm trying to do the steps, and it's just not really working. So around 2014, my father had gotten sick. My dad got sick, and it turned out he had cancer. And I was living in an Oxford house at the time, and so
It's a sober living home for those of you who don't know the Oxford houses.
Yeah, and so I'd moved in with them to take care of my dad, and was just in the height of pain pills and morphine and all that crazy stuff. And I have that story where I was taking some of my dad's meds, and it was, and that didn't bother me until after I got sober again. But he died, and I kind of went crazy. It was a very, very difficult time, and my dad was my best friend, and he kind of held everything together, and when he died, everything went with it, and so I was just kind of lost, and still doing drugs and not drinking yet, but anyway, so after a huge bottom there, I had gone back to treatment, back to the same center that I went to when I was 25, and they basically said they couldn't help me. I mean,
They didn't admit you?
Well, they admitted me, but I remember meeting with the psychiatrist, and he said, the best I can tell you is to see someone when you get out. And I thought, I'm literally dying, and that's not good enough for me. And so series of events happened in rehab. I checked out, I got drunk, I crashed my car, I got 2 DUIs like within a period of 2 or 3 days. And so when I got back there, she said, you need long-term care. And I know of a place that's fairly new, but I know some people there, and so let's check it out. And that was AspenRidge. And so the idea of staying in treatment for 90 days was okay to me because I was homeless. I had nothing. I had no family, no relationships, none of that. And so I got here, and it was pretty messy. It was scary. It was, and I joke about it, but it's not a joke. I mean, I was still looking for places to jump off, a high rooftop or an exposed rafter to hang myself, and that's just where my brain was at. And so through the course of being here at AspenRidge was therapy and one-on-one, and we did some brain spotting, some EMDR, which changed my life really. So at the end of it was 89 days, and I was going to court for the DUIs. It was my third,
which could have been a year.
Well, she sentenced
jail
me.
Felony.
She sentenced me to 2 years in county. Yeah, and I was just so numb at the time. I was like, what? What just happened? Long story short, my therapist and the program director really worked with the DA and a public defender for me, and I got out in 3 months on the condition that I come back here for 6 months. So that whole year of 9 months in treatment and 3 months in jail was just kind of this.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, but it gave me time to really dig in and reflect and face some hard truths. And I was 40, early 40s, mid 40s when I came in here, and I had nothing to show for my life. I had great kids. We had estranged relationships. But yeah, there was just nothing there, and so I kind of committed to myself that I was going to do this program to the best of my ability, and if it didn't work,
give it the good old college try.
I had options, yeah, and it worked, and so I ended up getting a position here, just doing some maintenance and things. We were opening one of the women's houses, and after that, the owner had hired me on to do it was a special projects manager, which meant everything nobody else wants to do. And I was excited. I wanted to work in rehab, and I thought, this is where I want to belong. This is the kind of work I want to do. I want to work with clients. I want to work with people in recovery, and that sense of responsibility to not just the program, but for me it was to AspenRidge and what they had done for me, and so I did that. I did that for about a year, and then I started the HR department way back when, and then I had connected with an old high school friend that was going through a tough time, and she was in recovery and I was in recovery, and so she lived in another state, and so it was fine for us to kind of get deep with each other and not fear somebody showing up at your house.
Safe distance.
It's very safe distance. And we developed a friendship and then a relationship, and so I had moved to be with my wife, and we stayed there in Wichita for about a year. That's the only reason to move to Wichita, is if you love somebody and you have to,
I was to say Colorado to Wichita, not exactly a lateral move,
Yeah.
kind of a downgrade.
Yeah.
No offense to anyone in Wichita.
It was great. I mean, they have a pretty good recovery community out there.
Do they?
Yeah, I was surprised. But still, a lot of that You don't need rehab, you don't need therapy, just go to meetings. And I knew different at this point. Like, I could never go back to preaching that again. And I've since met a lot of people in recovery that are like, yeah, I had to go, I had to get, some therapy, some of those other things done to be able to function in a community, in a 12-step program. And so, we were doing great. We were living out there, and I got a call from the other previous owner and said, I have this position, and would you like to come back? And there was no thought in my mind. The thought was, I'm going to have to convince my wife, like, this is a big deal. And she had established a really good support system out there, and 12-step and sponsors and friends, and just had a great community. So it was a lot for her to get up and, pack up and come with me. But we decided to do it together. And so I came back to work in operations in November of 19. And just this year, I was promoted to ops director, and now I oversee all 3 locations operationally and client services based things, and I just love it. This is probably the most comfortable I've ever been in my life, and not just in the job, in my life, in my emotional natures, in my relationships, and those kinds of things. I really didn't think it would be possible. I mean, I thought I had done some real damage physically, psychologically, and to recover from that through AspenRidge programs and 12-step programs, it was just it's a miracle. And everybody says that, and I know after a while it sounds a little cliche, but to go from the person that I was and doing the things that I was doing to what I am today is not of my doing. I just followed people that came before me and took direction and just did what I was told, because I was done. I wanted to be done. I wanted it to be over. And so on next June 4th will be 5 years.
Congrats!
Since I was a client here, so.
I didn't realize our sobriety dates were that close.
Oh yeah.
I mean, well, you've got me by about a year, but pretty close.
We all have today, Steve.
No, I think that's absolutely fantastic. It's great to hear that other people can find such passion and just personal fulfillment working in recovery like I do. We were talking before we hit the live button about working in PR firms before I came here, and how nice it is to just get in my car, turn off my laptop, whatever it is at the end of the day, and know that like the end goal of what we do helps people get that corny cliche, and
it's a miracle. And my mom was in town. We were talking about and that was a pretty strained relationship at the end, and so I get to talk to clients about my experience coming through here, and I also get to talk to families or parents from my mom's perspective. My mom, and she still feels bad to this day, as I was living there, taking care of my dad, she finally said, you have to go. You can't stay here, and I wish you the best. And so, I tell her, it's like, you gave me that gift, though, to be able to help another family, make that decision, as hard as it is, but really to kind of, so it's like from an Al-Anon perspective and an addict perspective, that it really works, that this stuff is, it works.
I think the therapy component of what we do is just so critical. We have remarkably similar stories. I don't have kids or anything, but there are a lot of parallels in our stories. Yeah. And I'm part of a 12-step organization, but before I went to treatment, I went twice a week, 9 months, and saw a therapist. And I don't think I would have been able to successfully complete treatment and be sober, 4 years later if I hadn't have done that tough twice a week, brutal therapy stuff. I think, 12-step programs are fantastic. I think they're just enough for some people, but I was at a point where there were a lot of underlying issues that needed to be dealt with before I, could.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's, and I'm not knocking anybody, but just that's where it sort of changed in the 12-step groups, where you had that older generation where they didn't have access to treatment or to hospitals, those kinds of things. And now, a lot of people in recovery have done therapy or are seeking it out now. And I think it's just such it's such a major component of the addiction and, trauma and, these things that really, they may get touched on the surface through a 12-step program, but to really process and go through the healing of
with
that.
A professional.
With a professional, And I, again, I'm part of a 12-step group, so I'm not knocking anything, but I think finally we're getting to a place where we understand both, and that both go hand in hand.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point. I don't think it's not either or. I think, all these things, there's AA, NA, HA, CA, Recovery Dharma, Smart Recovery, hanging out with the guys at the Phoenix. Used to be Phoenix Multisport. I think, putting all those things combined with therapy make, set people up for success better than just, a couple meetings a week in the sponsorship work.
Yeah, and I think the alumni work that that Mary does, or at AspenRidge is priceless. I think that, it's so important. I think for us in client services, the main thing is to establish a routine, establish a community for when you get out. I mean, we're already planning for what are you going to do when you get out of here, the first week they get here, and kind of case management and those kinds of things. But to have somebody that kind of spearheads that alumni community and keeps everybody connected, and it's just amazing. It's, you make friends in treatment. That's just what happens, and some you don't want to stay friends with, and and there are other people that really support each other going through, a program like that, and so I think the important part of the alumni is, like I said, is just keeping that relationship, that community intact.
Even with people you didn't go to treatment.
Yeah,
even
it's true.
Everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's story's kind of the same.
Yeah.
So we have an app that we use to our alumni to keep them connected, and I don't know if you poke around in there.
I do. Yeah.
But just to see the interactions between people that you can tell by their treatment dates that there's no way they knew each other, and then they become friends through that. It's just pretty cool to see people put together a community that way.
Yeah, it is, and to stay in it, and I think to say, okay, you're leaving the program, you need to go find something, is not helpful at all.
No.
I mean, that's damaging. And so it's just one of the things that I love about what we do as a company. I like the fact that we also have, a certain percentage of client services staff that have been through AspenRidge, and have been through treatment. And I think that kind of experience, those folks that work with clients every day in a non-therapy environment, it's priceless, because to hear from someone, I remember my house manager being 2 years sober, and I thought, wow, that's cool, and he had been through treatment and all those other things. And so you start to get a little hope, when you see people, and it's not about the job or anything, but just to hear their story and how they kind of got to where they are now, and to support treatment and 12-step programs and that kind of stuff is really, really helpful to clients that come in.
Absolutely. It's just, a little bit of street cred. It's
That's
like,
right.
This guy's not just telling me to, do the dishes to be a dick. Like, he realizes that this is,
right.
He's been there in my shoes too. So
Right.
it's a little, I know for my case, it was a little easier to take being told what to do when it was a person who'd walked in my shoes. Like, all right, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about. And I should just, be humble, shut up, and do what I'm told.
That's right. Which happens, unfortunately. But, yeah.
Well, it's a great story. Thank you so much
Thanks, man.
for taking the time to share it with everyone watching.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for joining us. Come back next week. We'll have another episode Tuesdays at 12:05 every week. And if you or someone you know needs help with addiction, mental health, or trauma, you can visit AspenRidgeRecovery.com. Or you can give us a call at 855-281-5588. We do accept most major insurance plans. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, man.